My name's Tom Lee. I'm the director of Sunlight Labs, which is the engineering division of the Sunlight Foundation. And I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to speak to you a little bit about how Sunlight uses technology to shine light onto the questions that have been brought up in this panel so far of political finance and transparency. The site that's on the screen right now represents our flagship effort in this respect. Influence Explorer is, first and foremost, a web interface and database that combines political finance and influence information about the US political system, both at the federal and state level, into a central location, linking together records for corporate givers, politicians, and prominent individuals. We feel that this allows journalists, watchdogs, researchers, and the public to delve into the complex web of relationships in US politics and understand the roots of where our policies come from. In particular, the types of information we cover include campaign finance contributions, in this case aggregated by the employees of corporations, lobbying expenditures made on behalf of individual businesses, including references to specific issues and, where available, bill numbers, participation in the regulatory process, public comments filed about or by the business entity, recipients of grants and contracts from the federal government. We also display that information. Similarly, contractor misconduct, as reported, environmental violations, and finally, presence on federal advisory committees. For politicians, we also include information about fundraising activities where we're able to collect it, including specific events. So this interface provides a tremendous amount of information. There are tens of thousands of entities covered by it and millions of records. But the Influence Explorer project extends beyond simply the web interface. The technical approach we take emphasizes openness and reusability, and this fosters not only our own technical development, but that of people outside of Sunlight. In particular, all of the data on the site is available as a bulk download without any type of paywall, registration process, or limitation on use, other than a few license terms imposed by upstream data providers. This lets people explore the data and come up with innovative uses for it without our permission, supervision, or need for our own imagination to shape it. Second, the site is powered by an API, an application programming interface, which is a system that developers can use to reliably get information from databases and other computerized systems. This not only facilitates our own development processes, but allows others to make use of our systems without making the same level of technical investment that we have initially. As a simple example, our Open States project, which is primarily about the legislative process in states, is able to include campaign finance information very simply, thanks to the fact that the Influence Explorer API is already created. But the possibilities extend well beyond this. One project that we employed takes arbitrary text from the web and identifies entities that are present in it and also in our database and extracts records from it. It's called Polygraphed, and this is an example. The article that was just on screen now has had all of the relevant entities from our database extracted and the relationships between them exposed in this sidebar, giving users an instant view onto the political relationships that might exist and which might shape the story. This is a particularly long one. Similarly, our project Inbox Influence, which we currently have in a hibernation state, thanks to changes in Gmail, allows users, thanks to a lookup based on their domain and name records, to view the political giving activity of those they correspond with, to better understand how the businesses that they interact with and the people that they write to are involved in the political finance system. People outside of Sunlight also employ these technologies. I was very pleased to see a Chrome web extension recently released that performs similar functionality. Again, this was something that we only learned about once it was released. It requires no interaction on Sunlight's part. The system to obtain access to our systems is completely automated. But this was an independent developer who was interested in the issue and wished to make a difference. And thanks to the open design of our systems, was able to do so. And although I don't have a screenshot of it, there are many, many other examples of this. One of my favorites is an app called Boycott, which allows people with a mobile phone to scan the UPC barcodes on products that they buy and understand the participation of that firm in the political finance process. So we're very proud of this, and we think that it allows a deep window onto the relationships that shape policymaking in the US. But there are some challenges, and they're challenges that we found are fairly universal as we speak to groups pursuing this kind of work in an international context. In particular, I want to point out the difficulties of entity resolution, deduplicating records in particular. If there's a record for Ellen Miller in the US political finance data sets that we employ, there's not a simple way to remove other records to other Ellen Millers into a single record that makes sense and which accurately represents her activities. This is rooted in a lack of identifiers and a lack of policies enforced at the federal level that provide distinctive entities. And although there are some promising technical approaches to resolving this, we believe that ultimately it's a matter of policy to reform that. Relatedly, the timeliness of these records is a substantial challenge. Deduplicating those records ultimately comes down at the moment to human intervention, and as you can imagine, that's a slow process. That means that it can be months after an election before we have a full picture of how financing shaped that election. Obviously, this is not an optimal situation. And again, it's one that we believe can be resolved in part by technical interventions, but which might ultimately have to be resolved by legal reforms. And finally, the completeness of reporting remains a difficulty for us in the US and elsewhere. Recent decisions by the US Supreme Court vastly expanded the types of anonymous money that can flow into the US system. And many of the disclosure regimes that we collect information on are partial or voluntary. Lobbying records in particular, although they do have legal standards attached to them, face no enforcement whatsoever for noncompliance. And in some cases, entity records like those references to specific pieces of legislation are entirely voluntary on the part of lobbyists. So while we think we have an important and useful piece of the picture, we know we don't have all of it. And we know that although there are useful interventions that can be pursued by technologists, developers, and reformers, we think that ultimately the government is going to have to change policy to provide the kind of data that we need to provide a complete picture of political finance in the US. These are substantial challenges, but we do believe they can be overcome, and we're very excited to work with others in this community to resolve them.